Masechet Yevamot, Daf Lamed He. This daf will bring to a close the third perek, and we will also begin the fourth perek on Amud Bet. The Mishnah mentioned that in the case of brides being swapped, they can go back to their original husbands afterwards. If they are minors, then they can go back right away because there's no possibility that they're pregnant. If they are adults, if the women are adults, then they have to wait 3 months in order to ascertain who is the father, which will have a big difference. If the father is the one that they were not engaged to, then the children will be mamzerim. And so we want to make sure that the children are okay. So since we mentioned that, we're going to see two versions of a statement of Shemuel regarding various cases, women in general, who has to wait 3 months and who does not. Amar Shemuel v'chulan sirichot lehamtin shelosha chodashim chutz migiyoret u'meshuchreret ketana. Shemuel says all women who were involved in any kind of a situation like this have to wait 3 months, except for a convert and a maidservant who was Shifcha Kanaanit, who was freed and now becomes Jewish, so similar to a conversion process, who are minors. So since they're minors, so there's no way that they're pregnant, and now they became Jewish. So we would want to know whether any children that they then have, if they become pregnant afterwards, are Jewish or not, but they don't need to wait because they're minors when they converted, so there's no way that they were pregnant before. Okay, so that's a statement, and then we infer from it, Aval ketana bat Yisrael siricha lamtin shelosha chodashim. Since Shemuel only excluded converts and maidservants, that means that someone who's a girl who's born Jewish, even though she's a minor, would, and we know that she had some kind of intercourse, then she would have to wait 3 months. We'll have to explain why, because she can't get pregnant either. We're going to explain it's a gezerah. Ubemai. So what kind of case is this talking about regarding this minor? If it means that she was married off by her family as a minor and then she objected to it and got out of the marriage, Shemuel said explicitly that if then she gets remarried, she does not have to wait 3 months. She's a minor, so there's no reason for her to think that she can't be pregnant, so there's no reason for her to wait. V'beget, if she was married off as a minor and she got a divorce, ha'amara Shemuel chadazimna, then she would have to wait 3 months, but Shemuel already said this, so it can't be that he's saying it again. We have an economy of words, of statements of Amoraim as well, and he wouldn't bother to say this twice. Damar Shemuel me'anabo and asricha lamtin shelosha chodashim natan naget sricha lamtin shelosha chodashim. Shemuel mentioned both of these cases in one statement. That in the case of Mi'un, when her brother or father married her off, and she objected to it, then she does not have to wait. If she was married off and she was divorced, she would have to wait. And so Shemuel cannot be talking about either of those two cases. Ela biznut. Rather, when Shemuel said here the bechulan serichot, and that we inferred from that a Jewish-born girl does have to wait 3 months, it was talking about a case where she was involved in intercourse out of wedlock in a licentious way. And that's a case where she would have to, Shemuel didn't teach that before, and Shemuel says, yes, she has to wait 3 months. Now why? Isn't she a minor, and she can't become pregnant anyway? The reason is, Gazru Rabbanan Ketana Mishum Gedola. The rabbis made a gezerah that if we say that a minor can get married right away, people are going to say, oh, I guess people can get married right away, even though they just had intercourse before their wedding. So therefore, we're going to make no distinction, and we're going to require it from Jewish women, Jewish minors, for people for adults, just so we don't mix them up, so that we don't think that adults don't have to. Good. Hold on. Do we really make such a gezerah? We have a mishnah. Our mishnah, the one that we just learned recently in this perek, that says that if the brides are swapped but they're minors and so they cannot become pregnant, then they can go back to their proper husbands, the ones that gave them the kiddushin, immediately. And so we see we do not make a gezerah, minors can go back. Amar Rav Gidel Amar Rav Hora'at Sha'ah. So Rav explains that case was a special case. Hora'at Sha'ah is a general category where the rabbis have authority for, as a temporary enactment, they can even override a deoraita law because there's a special need. And so this was a special case of the brides being swapped, and it was by mistake, and so there's no way that they didn't do this on purpose, and so now we don't have to worry that this is going to come to a gezerat, that we're going to make a mistake for other cases, because this is such an unusual case. And so therefore, in this particular case, the rabbi said the brides were swapped by mistake, they can go back to their original husbands. But in a regular case of a minor who was involved in intercourse out of wedlock, then she should wait 3 months, so that as a gezerah, so that we know that adults also have to. Okay, now we ask a very good question. Mikelal dehavai, hold on, are you assuming that our Mishnah's case of bride swapping, two brothers that engaged, did kiddushin with two sisters, and then they got swapped, do you think that this actually happened? Obviously not. This is a theoretical case that we just brought as a thought experiment to figure out how many violations and discuss isur halal isur. It was an interesting theoretical case. No one thinks it actually happened. Rather, our point is that it would be, it's like it was a temporary enactment. If such a case would occur, theoretically, then theoretically we would allow the minors to go back to their husbands immediately, because the rabbis do not make a gezerah on unusual cases. No need to do that. So switching brides does not often happen. That's why our Mishnah said they can go back right away. But in a more usual case of just a regular minor out of wedlock, she would have to wait 3 months. Okay, this is actually very important Gemara, showing that the Gemara itself understands the cases of the Mishnah as being only theoretical for pedagogic use only. Okay, good. Now, Lishana Harina. Now we have another version of what Shemuel says and a whole discussion on that. Amrila, Amar Shemuel, Kulan Sirichot Leamtin Shelosha Chodashim, Hotz Migiyoret Umeshuchreret Gedola. This one's more lenient. This one says everyone has to wait, all women have to wait 3 months between intercourse with one man and with the second man, except for a convert and someone maidservant who's freed as an adult. Even they do not have to wait. Okay, so we infer from this, Aval ketana bat Yisrael ena sericha lamtin shelosha chodashim. We can infer from this that since it's talking about adults in this version, so talking about adults, we can infer that yes, Jewish-born adult women would have to wait 3 months, but Jewish-born minors would not have to wait 3 months. So this is the opposite of the first version. Okay, b'mai, what kind of case is it talking about? If it's talking about a case where she was married off by her family and she objected to the marriage and now she's going to go marry someone else, there as a minor, and she can't get pregnant. So Shemuel said this already one time and said that it's not necessary. So we know this already. This now is the opposite of what we're switching mi'un and get from what the version before. But regarding get, if she was divorced as a minor, then she requires 3 months. Where do we see that? Both in the same statement of Shemuel, Damash Shemuel. This is the same as the first version. If she objected to her marriage, then she does not have to wait. If she was married and divorced, then she does have to wait. So it can't be talking about either of these cases, because these are things we know already. And so what does Shemuel come to include? Ela biznut, uznut beketana la shechiach. Rather, we're talking about a case of intercourse out of wedlock, promiscuous, and regarding that, such a case with a minor, that is not found often, and therefore there's no reason to make a gezerah. So you see, in this case, in this version, is more lenient, and this case of a minor out of wedlock does not have to wait 3 months. Okay, now giyoret u'meshuchreret deshechiach behuzenut ligzor. Hold on. Really, we should make a gezerah, since now you're talking about convert and meshuchreret. you said as adults, even as adults, do not have to wait 3 months. But why not? There, it is common that they will have intercourse while they are not Jewish or as a maidservant, and therefore we should make a gezerah that they should wait 3 months. They're adults. They can become pregnant. You know what? It must be Shemuel is following the opinion of Rabbi Yosef in the following baraita. We're adding another category here of shivuya. This is a Jewish woman who was taken captive. Sheniftu v'shenitgayiru v'shenishtacheredu, who were redeemed, or converted, or freed. Sirichot lamtin shelosha chodashim. All these three categories, we have to assume that maybe while they were in that state, they had relations with someone, and they could be pregnant. So we want to, now that they are back home and free and Jewish, we want to make sure before they can be married to someone else or go back to their husbands, we have to make sure that they wait 3 months so that we know who it is. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. But we're saying that Shmuel is going to follow Rabbi Yosef's opinion, who's more lenient to Rabbi Yosef. Matir le'ares ve'linaseh miyad. He says they can go ahead and do kiddushin and marry immediately. So Shmuel's following that. Amar Rabba, my tamad Rabbi Yosef, kasabar, isha mizana meshameshet bemoch kedeh shelo titaber. What is the reason for Rabbi Yosef that he permits in these cases, even though they are adults and they could become pregnant? And the answer is that when a woman is involved in intercourse in such cases, then she uses an absorbent cloth. And that, so it's like as a contraceptive, and that way she will not become pregnant, and therefore we assume that in these cases she's going to make sure she's not pregnant. So we don't have to wait 3 months. I guess they were effective enough that we can rely on them. Amar le'Abaye, bishlam agiyoret kevan dedataha le'igayure minatera nafsha. Abaye challenges Rabbah, and he says, listen, I understand, it makes sense what you said regarding a convert, because she knows she's going to be converting, she's going through the process, and so she's going to make sure that she doesn't become pregnant before the conversion. She herself will want to know any child that she has, whether it was conceived while she was not Jewish or when she was Jewish. So she's going to make sure to either refrain or use a contraception before the conversion and not get pregnant. So that I could agree with you. Someone who is a Jewish woman who's captive, or a maidservant, also they're around, they're listening to their masters, and they hear that the masters say, you know what, in a certain date, I'm going to let the person go free from captivity, or be freed from being a maidservant. And therefore, they also will say, oh, I'm going to be freed. I'm going back to regular life. I may get married there. And so they're also going to make sure not to get pregnant and use these absorbent cloths to not get pregnant. So we can assume that they were not pregnant. They don't have to wait 3 months. So fine, it makes sense in those cases. Ella, Yoset beshen ve'ayin hechim ashkachat. But in the case of a maidservant, shivcha kena'anit, who is freed if she is injured by her master, and the master knocks out a tooth or her eye, she goes free. Now, this is not something you could plan. This is something that may just happen. The master gets angry at her and knocks out her tooth. That's it. She goes free. So she wasn't planning on it, and therefore she would not have been careful not to get pregnant. A maidservant could get pregnant, and that's because the children become part of the household, and maybe she would want to. So then in that case, it would make sense that we should make her wait 3 months. So that's a challenge. How come in that case you would say no, you don't have to wait 3 months? Maybe you'll say, oh, the Rabbi Yosef would agree in that case, right? Any situation where her transfer to freedom happens by itself and is not planned, and she's not aware, maybe the Yosef would agree in those cases. You should wait 3 months. V'hatenan anusa umefuta siricha lamtin shelosha chodashim. Rabbi Yosef matir le'ades v'naseh miyad. But that can't be, because in this Mishnah we see a woman who was raped. Now you don't plan on being raped. Umefuta, so a woman who is seduced, they have to wait 3 months according to the Yehuda. But the Yosef says no, they can go and marry immediately. And so you see, even cases where she's not planning to go free and she's not using contraceptive, so she does not have to wait 3 months according to the Bi Yosef. So this is a challenge. Why should we assume that she's not pregnant? So Abaye says, I have a different answer. Isha mizanna mitapechet shelo titaber. A woman who is in any of these illicit relations, including if she's raped or she or whatever the case, assuming that she does not want to become pregnant, even if she does not have ready an absorbent cloth, she will after intercourse turn over so that the semen will go out of her, and so that she will not become pregnant. So in other words, another type of method of not becoming pregnant that even in these cases can be used. And so we can assume that she used this type of method. Again, I don't know how effective this is. Don't try this at home. But this is sufficient to assume that she doesn't have to wait 3 months, and the Rabbi Yosef is assuming that. Ve'idach. Okay, now back to the Yehuda. How can the Yehuda require 3 months if, in fact, she can turn over, and that will prevent her pregnancy? And the answer is Chashinan Shema lo nitapecha yafe yafe. The Yehuda says this is not a very accurate method. And maybe she did not do this technique perfectly and did not turn over very well, and then therefore we have to suspect that she is in fact pregnant and has to wait 3 months, and that's the difference between them. Okay, very interesting. This is a topic that's going to come back. We're going to return to in the next Perek. And actually is irrelevant to halacha l'maaseh in cases of conversion or other cases when people have to wait 3 months. Okay, v'im hayu kohanot. Now the Mishnah ended with saying that in the case of the brides who were swapped, if they were kohanot, which generally means that they were a daughter of a kohen, then they cannot eat teruma anymore. So we question this. Kohanot in Yisraelit la. So if they were a daughter of Kohen, then they have to stop eating teruma. But if they were a daughter of a Yisrael, then they can keep eating teruma. This doesn't make sense, because generally when a woman is single, she goes by whatever the father is, and so if the father is a Kohen, she can eat teruma. But once she gets married, and here, right, she is getting married, so then it depends on the husband's status. And so even if she's Yisraelit, she was born from Israel, but she's married to a Kohen, the point is now that she had relations with the wrong guy, so she is a zona, even if it's by mistake, and she can no longer have teruma, even though her husband is a kohen. So she is also disqualified. So why are you saying, well, it doesn't matter who her father is, all matters is who she's married to? So we explain this. Ema im hayu neshe kohen. Oh, rather we should understand that what the Mishnah is saying, that if she is the wife of a kohen, then she can no longer eat teruma. Okay, neshe kohanim in, neshe Yisraelim la. And then we ask also about that. Would this switching of the brides not affect her if she was married to a Yisrael? In that case, she would not have been eating teruma anyway, but it still can have an effect on her future marriageable status. V'hamar Rav Amram, hamilita amar lan Rav Sheshat, ve'anharinhu le'aynin mimatnitin. Rav Amram reported that there was a matter that Rav Sheshet taught us regarding a Mishnah that's coming up later, and he lit up our eyes with this insight. And his insight was, Eshet Yisrael shene'ensa. If you have a wife, someone who's married to a Yisrael, who is raped, she could go back to her husband because it's not adultery by consensual adultery. In that case, she would be prohibited to her husband. But if she was forced, then she can go back to her husband as a Yisrael. Nevertheless, pisula lekihuna, in the future, let's say that husband dies, she will be prohibited from a kohen. Kohen is not allowed to marry a woman who engaged in intercourse while with someone else while married, even if it was not consensual, if it was not her fault. So this can affect even something she does while married to a Yisrael can affect her afterwards. So therefore, we're going to abandon this explanation and go back to the simple reading of the Mishnah. Amar Rabba Hachika Amar Im Hayu Kohanot Nisuot LiYisrael Nifselu Min HaTeruma Debe Nashayhu. Rabba says, here's what the Mishnah means. If you have a kohenet, meaning someone who's a daughter of a kohen, now she did get kiddushin with a Yisrael. She can't. Someone who's married, a kohenet who's married to a Yisrael, cannot eat teruma anymore. She follows her husband's family. She follows her husband's status. However, if such a thing happened and then she got switched, the brides got switched, then afterwards, should that husband die and without children, normally she would go back to her father's house and again be able to eat teruma. That would be the normal case. But in this case, because she had this problem that she had intercourse with the wrong person and in an adulterous way, even though it was by mistake, nevertheless, she loses her status as a bat kohen, and she therefore, even in the future, will not be able to go back and eat teruma from her father's home. Hadran alach arba'a achin. And now we begin the next perek, perek 4. The beginning of the fourth perek is going to start with the topic, continue with the topic of waiting 3 months in order to determine paternity. This is important in the case of Yibum and Chalisa. And Lecha Techila, a person should wait 3 months before performing Yibum or Chalisa to ensure that the deceased brother, in fact, does not have children, because if any of his wives are pregnant and has a child, then you're not allowed to do yibum and no need for chalitza. So really, you're supposed to wait for 3 months. What if you don't? Then that's what the Mishnah is talking about. One note of background: as someone who does chalitza, we prohibit the close relatives as if they were married and divorced. If a couple is married and divorced, then nevertheless the husband is prohibited to his wife's sister and mother and close relatives, and so too she is also prohibited to his close relatives, even though they actually were never married. But the process of having a zikah and chalisa is similar enough. Either that it's similar enough as a doraita level or on the drabanan level as a gezerah, and that is something that the Gemara today will discuss. Okay, we begin. Hacholes libim to. V'nimset me'oberet, a person did not wait 3 months after the brother died, and he does halitza to the Yevamot, but turns out she had been pregnant, v'yalda, and she gave birth. בזמן שהוולד של קיימה הוא מותר בקרובותיה והיא מותרת בקרוביו ולא פסלה מן הכהונה. So if she gives birth and the child survives, then he is permitted to go and marry her relatives, and she can marry his relatives, and she is not pisula she can marry a kohen in the future should because she had a child. He did chalitza, and so now she's just a widow, and this chalitza that they did is nothing. It was just an empty act, and so therefore she can go ahead with her life. She has a child from her original marriage, and therefore there was no need for yibum, no need for chalitza. There's a regular widow, and she can marry a kohen if she wants. Good. And havalat shel kayama. However, if the child is not viable, and that means that the brother died without children, and yibum or chalitza is necessary, and he did chalitza. So then, hu asu bikrovoteha, v'asura bikrovav, upesalah min hakehuna. Then that's like a regular case of chalitza, even though she was pregnant at the time that he did chalitza. But it doesn't matter. We don't take into consideration that pregnancy because that does not produce a child, and therefore he is prohibited to her close relatives, and she is prohibited to his close relatives, and now she is like a chalutza who cannot marry a kohen. Good. Next case. Hakoneset yevimto v'miset me'obedet v'yalda. Now in this case, instead of doing chalitza, he does yibum within 3 months without having verified whether she was pregnant or not. And it turns out she was pregnant, and she gives birth. Bisman shavalat shel kayama. If that child is viable, then it turns out she did not need yibum, right? Her husband died with children, and that act of yibum was a prohibited act of irva. So you'll see they have to separate. He doesn't have to give her a get because there is no marriage. Marriage cannot apply to a case of irva, but they cannot remain together. Vechayavin bekorban, and they both have to bring, if they did it, assuming they did it by mistake. He didn't know that she was pregnant. She didn't know either. Then they have to bring a korban hatat for having violated adayot. Ve'im en valat shel kayama yekayem. But if it turns out that the child is not viable, then he can that yibum then turns out she did not have a child. The brother died without children, and therefore the required yibum, and the yibum is good, and so they can remain married as if she was never pregnant, and they can live happily ever after. Last case, safek ben tish'a larishon, safek ben shiv'a lacharon, yosiv habalad kasher v'chayavin b'asham talui. If they in fact did yibum, and then she has this child, and it's not clear, we're not sure if there's a full-term baby from the deceased husband or a preemie from the yavam. So in that case, we're not sure if this act of yibum was proper or edva, and so since we're not sure, they have to separate just in case it's not. The child is okay no matter what, not a mamzer, because either way they're totally fine. If the child is from the original husband, then good. That's a proper child from the original husband. They were married, and the fact that she did this prohibited relation with the brother-in-law after does not affect the child. And if this child is from the yavam, well, that means that the deceased brother died without children. Yibum was necessary, and this is a child from yibum, so it's kosher either way. But since they are not sure if they sinned or not, they do not bring a korban hatat. That's if someone knows that he sinned mistakenly. But if someone is not certain whether or not he sinned mistakenly in something that would be chayav karet if done on purpose, then they do not bring a korban hatat, but rather an asham talui. Good. Those are the cases of the Mishnah. Incidentally, we talked about viability, ben kayama. That means that the child is born alive and remains alive for 30 days. Then we know that it has a good chance of living and is healthy. Child that is either there's a miscarriage or is stillborn or dies within 30 days, then the first 30 days is very dangerous, and so therefore is not considered bar kayama. And so even if the child was born alive but not healthy and doesn't make it 30 days, nevertheless that would still be called that the brother does not have children and would require yibum. Okay, So now the Gemara is going to begin with a machloket directly related to the cases of the Mishnah. Itmar. Hacholes lim'oberet v'hipila. Someone who does halitza to a woman who's pregnant, whether they know that she's pregnant or not, and she miscarries. Okay, so he did chalitza, but she was pregnant at the time. Rabbi Yochanan amar ena siricha chalitza min achin. Rabbi Yochanan says that chalitza is a valid chalitza, and she does not require another one, even though she was pregnant at the time. It still counts. Rabbi Yochanan makes sense with our Mishnah, because our Mishnah said in such a case, she is prohibited to a kohen, and they are prohibited to each other's relatives, which makes it sound like the chalitza was a valid chalitza, so she wouldn't need another one. Resh Lakish says, nevertheless, because the chalitza was while she was pregnant, maybe she doesn't require yibum, there's no zikah, and therefore she has to do chalitza again. Okay, we're going to see in a couple of minutes that Rabbi Yochanan is going to challenge Resh Lakish based on our Mishnah that says they are prohibited. Why were they prohibited if the chalitza was invalid? Okay, we'll see about that. He's going to answer said Rabbanan. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan amar ena siricha. Now we're going to go ahead and explain. First, we're going to explain the two sides. Rabbi Yochanan amar ena siricha chalisa menachin chalisat meoberet shema chalisa ubiat meoberet shema bia. Rabbi Yochanan assumes that you do not need further chalitza because doing chalitza, even though she's pregnant, is nevertheless a valid chalitza. And if he would perform yibum, then that bia would be a valid yibum. If it turns out that she was it's a miscarriage, then that yibum is valid and they are married. He doesn't have to do anything else. Veresh Lakish amar siricha chalisa minachin chalisat meoberet lo shema chalisa ubeat meoberet lo shema habia. Resh Lakish is the opposite, because she is pregnant, so then she's still in this mode of maybe she has a child with her deceased husband, and so she has no zikah, no requirement, and if you'd go ahead and do chalitza, it's invalid, and if he would perform bi'ah with her, it would be invalid as yibum. Okay, now b'mai kami palge. I know we expanded the two explanations, but nevertheless we want to see what is the essence of their argument. You can explain it based on a pasuk or based on reason. We'll start with reason. Rabbi Yochanan savar im yavo Eliyahu v'yomar dehai avdei abera mapule mapela mila bat chalisa v'yibum hi hashtanameh tigle mileta lemafreya. Yochanan reasons as follows. Let's say Eliyahu Navi would come, and he knows everything. He knows the future, and he would say, "Listen, yes, she's pregnant now, but it's not a viable pregnancy. She's going to miscarry. So if we knew it was going to be a miscarriage, so then for sure she would require chalitza and yibum. Okay, so right now we don't know because we have a lack of knowledge. But when she miscarries, it turns out retroactively that pregnancy was not viable, and therefore we can discount it, and so she has no child, and she requires yibum or chalitza. Right? This would be a good question for modern medicine, sometimes based on conditions. The doctor can tell this pregnancy is not going to be viable. Right? If you can, even if you continue with it, it's going to be a miscarriage. So maybe we can even know now. We can have definite markers. Would that be sufficient? Okay. Anyway, Rabbi Yochanan says, right, retroactive knowledge is we can use to define what happens at the time of yibum or chalitza. And Resh Lakish says, no, we don't say something is revealed retroactively, that makes a difference. Right now, she is pregnant. Being pregnant means that she still has a status that she may very well have a child with her deceased husband, and she's not eligible for yibum or chalitza. And therefore, if you go do yibum or chalitza, that act is nothing, is invalid. Okay, so that's the logical reason for both sides. Or they can argue on the explanation of a pasuk. Rabbi Yochanan sabar uben and lo amar chamana veha let le. The Torah says if brothers dwell together and one of them dies and he has no child. Does he have a child? Look around, right? Look in the crib. There's no child. There is no living being that is a child. And pregnancy doesn't count. Fetus doesn't count as a child. So therefore, yes, she requires Yibum Chalitza right now. It's the opposite. If she has a child, then retroactively it'll be clear that you shouldn't have done it. But right now, she is eligible. Resh Lakish Savaru ben en lo ayen al alav. Resh Lakish says, no, well, we saw this derasha already once before. And en lo can be read as ayen lo if we don't pronounce the gutturals. And so then that means go and investigate. You can't just look around and see if there's an actual baby here in the room. You have to go and do an investigation, even if there's a possibility of a child being born. If she's pregnant, that also counts, and so you cannot. There's no eligibility. She is not eligible for Yibum and Chalitza, even if this investigation turns out that she's pregnant. Well, that's a possibility that she can have a child. So no Yibum and Chalitza. If you do Yibum and Chalitza, it's invalid. Good. Now we have the question. Itiber Rabbi Yochanan Resh Lakish en havalad shel kayama. Hu asu bikroboteha v'asura bikrovav upesala min hakehuna. Rabbi Yochanan quotes our Mishnah that talks about this very case and says if the child is not viable, all the more so if it's a miscarriage, he is prohibited to her relatives and she's prohibited to his relatives, and she cannot be with a kohen. In other words, she's considered a halusa. Rabbi Yochanan says this makes sense according to my opinion, because I say that doing chalitza while she's pregnant is a valid chalitza, and that's why she has the same law as any other halusa. Mishum hachi pesala, that's why she's pesula. And pesula to a kohen, and presumably also why she's prohibited to the relatives. And aledidach tamart chalisat meobedet lo shema chalisa amai pesala mina kehuna. But according to you, Resh Lakish, because you say that if she's pregnant, then this chalitza is invalid. So then it's just a nonsense act. It has no meaning. So then why should she be prohibited to a kohen and to relatives? Amar le midrabanan ulchumra be'alma. Shaki says you're right. The chalitza is invalid on a deoraita level. And when the Mishnah says that she's prohibited to a kohen, that's only midrabanan. It's just an extra stringency because you did do an act of chalitza. We don't want people, and then she's going to go marry a kohen. So people will say, oh, I guess a chalitza can marry a kohen. We don't want that. So really, it's drabanan. But the chalitza is invalid, and therefore, actually, you're going to need to do another chalitza to her. Okay, Ika da Amre, another version of this question that switches it around the opposite way. Iti Resh Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. Now Resh Lakish is asking Rabbi Yochanan, en havalat shel kayama. Hu asur bikroboteha v'asura bikrobav upesula mina keuna. Same case. The child is not viable. They are prohibited to each other's relatives, and she cannot marry a kohen. Bishama lididi de'amina chalisat mobedet lo shema chalisa. Resh Lakish says, now I can explain the Mishnah better by saying that the chalitza is invalid. Hainu de katani pesala mina kehuna lechumra velo katani enasiricha chalitza minachin. That's why the Mishnah says only that she cannot marry a kohen and be with other relatives. All that is only a chumra midrabanan as a gezerah. But notice that the Mishnah does not say that she is not required to receive chalitza from the brothers. And so we can infer that, in fact, she does need to receive chalitza from the brothers. Why? Because the chalitza that she got while she was pregnant is invalid. So the Mishnah makes sense according to me, Resh Lakish says. But according to you, really the Mishnah should go further and say not only is she pisula, but also one of the brothers still has to give her chalitza. Okay, good question. Amale inachiname vaida de taneresha lo pesala tanasefa pesala. Rabbi Yochanan responds that, yes, indeed, you are right. In fact, because the chalitza that was given while she is pregnant is a valid chalitza, so none of the brothers needs to give her chalitza again. So why doesn't it say so? Because since in the first, it's all because of parallelism structure of the Mishnah, because in the very first case of the Mishnah, where the child is viable, and so there the Mishnah said, Lo pesala, she is not disqualified from to be with the Kohen. So now I wanted to say if there's no child, then she is disqualified to a Kohen, because then she needs chalitza, and this is a valid chalitza. And so that's why it just says, it just focuses on the being disqualified. But indeed, you're right. It's true that she would not require another chalitza. That one is valid. Okay, and now another round of questions. And havalad shel kayama yekayem. This time, Rabbi Yochanan asks Lakish from the next case in the Mishnah, that if the child is not viable and he does yibum, then yekayem, they can remain married. Bishlama l'didida mina chalisat me'uberet shema chalisa u'biat me'uberet shema bi'a mishum hachi katane yekayem. Rabbi Yochanan says, this makes sense according to me. I say that chalitza while she's pregnant is valid, and bi'ah while she's pregnant is valid as yibum, and therefore when it turns out that the child is not viable, so then she needed yibum all along, and therefore that yibum is valid, and they can remain together. Good. Ela l'didachta mat chalisat me'uberet lo shema chalisa u'biat me'uberet lo shema bi'ah yachzor v'yib'ol v'kayem ba'eleh. But according to you, Resh Lakish, you said that while she's pregnant, chalisa is not valid, bi'ah is not valid as yibum. So now that she miscarries, in order to perform yibum, that original bi'ah was not valid, he will have to again perform bi'ah, and then he will be able to be married to her. So it should have said that in the Mishnah, that he has to go ahead again and do another bi'ah in order for that to be a valid yibum. And the Shakish answers, Ma yekayem yachzor v'yib'ol v'kayem de la sagi. And the Shakish says, yeah, that's exactly what it says. What does the word yekayem mean? It means that you have to go and do something, another bi'ah, in order to be married to her if you want to stay together. Because in fact, there is no other way. There is no other option. You can't give a get because there was no bi'ah and yibum, so they're not married in the first place. And it seems, according to the Shakish, that also you cannot do chalitza because he did have bi'ah with her. So therefore, doing chalitza now is not going to be sufficient. So even though that bi'ah is not, on the one hand, it's not considered arva because it turns out she didn't have a child, and so it's not a problem of arayot, but because she was pregnant, so it's not a full bi'ah that could be yibum, and so the only way to continue, the only next step here would be, in fact, to have bi'ah again, and that will confirm, that will be the official bi'ah of yibum, and that's what it means yekayem. So yes, I think that's how I interpret that word, and so Resh Lakish defends himself. Okay, now we have Ikadamra, another version where we turn this around just like we did in the first round of questioning. Iti beheresh Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. Resh Lakish is the one that challenges Rabbi Yochanan. It says, En avalad shel kayama yekayem, from the same part of it. If they do yibum while she's pregnant, and it turns out that the child is not viable, then yekayem, they remain married. Bishlama lididid, Shakish says, I can make sense of this. Amina chalisat meoberet, lo shema chalisa, biat meoberet, lo shema bi'ah. I say that this is invalid, this bi'ah that they did is nothing. Hainu de katane yekayem, yachzor v'yib'ol v'kayem. And that's why it says, yekayem means you have to do something, another act of bi'ah, in order to be married to her and then be able to stay with her. And in fact, there's no other way. You cannot do get, you cannot give a get, you cannot do chalitza, and so you have to do yibum again, bi'ah again, in order for that to affect yibum. Ela ledidach rasa yosi rasa yekayemi ba'aleh. The problem is, according to you, Rabbi Yochanan, since you said that act of bi'ah is valid yibum, actually now she has a choice according to you. If they want, they could just remain married, or he can give her a get. Since they are fully married, now a get will work, and maybe he changes his mind and he wants to give a get. So actually, there are choices. So the Mishnah should have mentioned all the choices. Okay, inachename, and Rabbi Yochanan will respond. You're right. He could give a get. I did that tana resha yosi tanana mesefa yekayem. But rather, because the previous case, again because of parallelism, the previous case where the child is viable, there it says they have to separate. They cannot remain together. So that's why here it says they can remain together just because of parallelism. But you're right, if he wanted to give a get, he would be able to do that as well. We will continue with another line of questioning against Rabbi Yochanan on the continuation here on the tomorrow. But now we have established this important machloket between Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.